Welcome to the Midnight Narrator, where every story holds a dark secret, and every whisper tells a chilling truth. Tonight's unsettling tale, The Midnight Shift at Marrow's, explores the terrifying experience of a night custodian at a seemingly ordinary small-town mercantile. But within its walls lurks something far more sinister than petty theft, something tied to the town's dark history. Sometimes the most mundane jobs can lead you into the heart of unimaginable horror. Are you ready to uncover the mystery that lies beneath the surface? 2 weeks prior, a peculiar advertisement caught my eye. Needed. Overnight custodian at Marrow's Mercantile in Oak Creek, WV. 11 p.m. 5 am shift, 23-hour. The listing struck me as unusual. Why would a small-town general store require overnight surveillance? Was petty theft that rampant? Desperation for income, however, outweighed my skepticism. After a brief phone call with a man named Silas, I found myself reporting for my first shift. The store's location immediately explained the need for a night watch. Marrow's Mercantile stood at the edge of a decaying plaza. Weather-beaten signs advertising vacant storefronts hung in dusty windows, evidence of years of neglect. The only other business still operating was a dimly lit pawnshop across the lot, its windows barred and foreboding. I parked near the entrance. As I approached, a figure hurried away from the building. "You must be Finn," she said, slightly out of breath. "The custodian?" "That's right." Silas left instructions. "They're on the counter by Register 1. She offered a quick nod and moved past me towards the only other vehicle in the deserted lot. "Thanks," I replied. "Be polite," I reminded myself. "She's a co-worker." I turned back. "Excuse me, what's your name?" She was already sliding into her car. The door slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and she sped away. So much for introductions. I faced the store again. The parking lot was now deserted, and the solitary streetlight near the entrance flickered erratically. A gust of wind sent a discarded plastic bag skittering across the asphalt. Here we go, I thought. The glass doors groaned open as I approached, and I stepped inside. Despite its dilapidated exterior, the interior was surprisingly well maintained. Soft, warm lighting illuminated the aisles, and gentle folk music played softly from hidden speakers. I walked to Register 1, where a folded sheet of paper awaited me. I unfolded it and began to read. "To Finn, welcome to the Marrow's team. We trust you'll find your time here productive. To assist you, we've compiled a few guidelines to ensure a smooth overnight experience. Patrol the premises every 45 minutes. You can spend the remaining time in the back office, monitoring the security feeds. Avoid the produce section after midnight. Do not linger near the root cellar door. If you hear scratching sounds from the storage room beneath the loading dock, disregard them. Any stray shopping baskets should be returned to the front porch immediately. If you encounter damp patches on the stockroom floor, do not touch them. Simply place a "Caution Wet Floor" sign nearby. Should you see a figure in the dairy aisle, proceed directly to the back office and remain there until it is gone. Do not attempt communication. The music system plays a pre-selected playlist of Appalachian folk tunes. If the music stops, immediately return to the back office and stay there until it resumes. Under no circumstances should you leave before your designated end time. Thank you, and we hope your night passes uneventfully. Silas. I reread the rules, a growing unease settling in my stomach. A figure in the dairy aisle? Avoid the produce section? These weren't typical custodian instructions. Perhaps it was a test of my ability to follow unusual directions. I glanced at the security camera mounted in the corner. All right. Challenge accepted. I checked my watch. 11:10 p.m. I decided to start my first patrol. The store felt different, empty and silent. The fresh produce had been covered with burlap sacks. The bakery section was shrouded in shadow. I turned into the meat department. The meat coolers were covered with thick canvas tarps. I could see glimpses of dark red through the gaps. I quickly looked away. I wasn't a vegetarian, but raw meat always made me uncomfortable. I turned towards the aisles. Aisle 3, canned goods. Aisle 4, cleaning supplies. Aisle 5, Aisle 6. Right. I wasn't supposed to go near the produce section. I focused on the floor. It felt ridiculous, but I was determined to follow the rules. I continued my patrol. A few minutes later, I located the back office, a plain door with a small frosted glass window. I noted its location. After this patrol, I planned to catch up on some reading. I reached the far end of the store, the loading dock. I turned back towards the front. That's when I saw it, a shopping basket abandoned in the middle of the aisle. I sighed. Of all the rules, this was the most irritating. I was a custodian, not a basket retriever. Wasn't that the closing staff's responsibility? Grumbling, I pushed the basket towards the front porch. The wheels rattled on the concrete floor. The folk music played softly. I rounded the corner past the registers, heading for the exit. Then I heard it, a faint sound, almost lost beneath the music. I stopped, straining to listen. Silence. Then I heard it again. It sounded like weeping. The hairs on my arms stood on end. There's no one else here. The doors were locked. Unless someone had been accidentally locked in. Maybe the woman I'd seen hadn't noticed them. "Hello?" I called out. A mournful sob answered. My heart pounded. It sounded like a woman. "I'm coming," I called, breaking into a jog. "Where are you?" There was no reply, only continued sobbing. I followed the sound, calling out reassurances. Then I froze. The sound was coming from the produce section. Avoid the produce section after midnight. Do not linger near the root cellar door. The instructions were explicit. I stopped just short of the entrance, next to a display of gardening tools. "I'm here to help," I called. "What's wrong?" A voice finally responded, choked with sobs. Help me," it pleaded. I wanted to rush in. One foot was already raised, ready to run, but something held me back. A gut feeling, a warning bell in my mind. Why would someone be in the restricted produce section? They were safe. They were inside with me. It wasn't like they were out in the dark. "Please come out," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I can help you better out here." "Help me," the voice repeated. The phrase sounded identical each time, a slight stutter at the beginning, emphasis on the word me. It sounded mechanical, like a recording. It didn't sound human. "Do you need me to call someone?" I asked. "Family? The authorities?" "Help me," the voice repeated. The "help me" sounded more desperate, twisting my stomach. I stood frozen beside the gardening tools. Even if the sobbing sounded unnatural, I couldn't ignore it. I could call the authorities, I thought. They'd know what to do. But my phone was in my backpack in the back office. Getting it meant passing the produce section. The rules didn't explicitly forbid walking past the produce section. They only said not to enter or linger, and I couldn't just stand there. What if someone truly needed help? "I'm going to get my phone and call for help," I announced. I took a deep breath and stepped past the entrance to the produce section, heading towards the back office. The instant I moved, the crying stopped. Abruptly, like a switch had been flipped. Then I heard footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps running down the aisle. Too heavy to be a child, coming straight for me. It's a trap, I thought. They're coming for me. But as soon as I cleared the entrance to the produce section, the sound ceased. Only the gentle folk music remained. I ran to the back office, forgetting entirely about the abandoned basket. The back office was small and cramped. The frosted glass window in the door was covered from the inside by a faded newspaper clipping, detailing a local tragedy from decades past. The unsolved disappearance of several children near the old Marrow farm, where the Mercantile now stood. The only light came from the security monitor. I scrolled through the feeds. None of them showed the produce section. It was intentionally out of view. After scanning the grainy images, I leaned back and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was almost 11:45. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe in this small, locked room. But I knew I wouldn't be safe if I ignored the rules. I shuddered, imagining what might have happened if I'd entered the produce section. I forced myself up and headed for the door. The store was silent. No sobbing, no footsteps. I started my patrol at the back, walking up aisle 17. Unfamiliar labels lined the shelves. I reached the end and turned towards the front. Then I realized I'd already broken a rule. The basket. I hadn't returned it. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead of being abandoned near the produce section, it sat by one of the registers. I hesitated, then grabbed it and headed outside. The parking lot was pitch black. Not a single functioning streetlight. It's just a few steps, I told myself. Just go in and out. It'll take a second. I hurried into the darkness, shoved the basket into the rack, and dashed back inside, locking the doors behind me. Okay. That wasn't so bad, I muttered, letting out a shaky breath. For a moment, I savored the quiet, the safety of being inside, alone. Then I froze. The silence. The folk music had stopped. How long had it been off? I'd been so focused on returning the basket that I hadn't noticed. A cold dread washed over me. I sprinted towards the back, past rows of unfamiliar products. I veered right and burst into the back office. I grabbed the list of rules and reread them. Under no circumstances should you leave before your designated end time. Why had Silas written that? Was it simply to prevent employees from abandoning their shifts? Or would some terrible fate await me if I left early? I desperately wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out a water bottle, and took a long drink. I scrolled through the security feeds. 4 more hours. The next few patrols were uneventful. The rules didn't specify the duration of the patrols. So, every 45 minutes I sprinted a quick lap around the store, which took less than a minute. The rest of the time, I remained locked in the back office. On the second patrol, I heard scratching sounds as I passed the storage room under the loading dock. They started as faint scrapes, then escalated into loud, frantic scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I ignored it as instructed and continued running. On the last patrol before 3 a.m., the music cut out again. The lights flickered briefly, plunging the store into near darkness before the emergency lights kicked in. I immediately detoured to the back office, the silence amplifying my anxiety. Now I sat in the office with 2 hours left. I stared at my watch, watching the seconds tick by. I stood up, trying to shake off the nervous energy, preparing for another quick patrol. I'd been a decent runner in school, but years of inactivity had taken their toll. The last patrol had left me winded. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My heart pounded. 3, 2, 1. I yanked the door open and bolted into the store. I didn't get far. A large, dark stain marred the floor. I froze. The air left my lungs. I stared at the stain, reflecting the dim emergency lights. The rules said to place a warning sign, but that would take time. I wasn't safe out here. I swallowed hard. I hurried to the supply closet, grabbed a mop and a bucket, and began cleaning as quickly as possible. The cloying sweetness I'd smelled earlier was now overpowering, making me gag. The task was unpleasant. I swished the mop through the dark fluid, then rinsed it in the bucket. The water turned a murky brown. Several times droplets splashed up, almost hitting me. I finished the cleanup, but it was 3:40 a.m. Time for another patrol. Too exhausted to run, I opted for a brisk walk. I headed towards the loading dock and the storage room. I noticed scratch marks on the metal door, deep gouges as if something with sharp claws had been trying to get out. I averted my eyes and continued my patrol. 1.5 hours left. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor. The folk music, which had resumed playing, was now a constant looping melody. It was starting to drive me crazy. I sighed and continued past the aisles. Then I stopped. Something had caught my eye. I backtracked and peered down one of the aisles. A figure stood in the dairy aisle. A tall, slender figure. It wore a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured its face. It stood perfectly still, facing away from me. One hand clutched a glass milk bottle. The rule flashed through my mind. Should you see a figure in the dairy aisle, proceed directly to the back office. I slowly retreated, trying to be as quiet as possible. I moved to the next aisle, heading for the back office. Scrape, Scrape, scrape. I heard a sound behind me. I quickened my pace, but then I stopped. The scraping wasn't coming from behind. It was coming from ahead. I glanced down the next aisle. The figure from the dairy aisle had moved. It was now at the end of the aisle, blocking my path to the back office. All I could see was the bottom of the long coat and a pair of worn leather boots. I backed away. It was the only direction I could go. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor, afraid to look up. But the figure was following me. Scrape, scrape. With each step I took, I saw the worn boots come into view. I sped up. So did the figure. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I spun around and sprinted down a random aisle heading for the back office. But halfway down I stopped. A stack of empty milk crates blocked my path. Not just one stack, several, piled haphazardly, creating an impassable barrier. I backed away, my heart pounding. Scrape. Slow, deliberate scraping. Coming closer. I took a chance. I turned and ran back into the open area, then ducked into another aisle. I knew it instantly. A dark, viscous puddle lay on the floor. The air was thick with a cloying, sweet odor, like rotting fruit mixed with something metallic. I'd entered the stockroom. I immediately turned to leave. But the figure was already there, blocking the exit. I turned and ran down the next aisle. Miraculously, I reached the end unscathed. I veered left towards the back office. Almost there. My hand grasped the doorknob. I yanked it open and stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. I stared at the locked door. Am I really safe here? The rules hadn't guaranteed safety. Perhaps staying in the office only delayed the inevitable. I turned to the security monitor. It showed the main store area. The aisles were empty. I switched to the next feed, the dairy aisle. Empty. I switched to the next. I recoiled. The figure was right there. In front of the back office door, its face pressed against the frosted glass, the newspaper clipping behind it distorting its features into a grotesque mask. It stood motionless, an unnerving stillness. I swallowed and glanced away from the monitor towards the door. My heart leaped into my throat when I saw a dark, elongated shadow stretching across the floor beneath the door. Go away. Please, go away, I pleaded silently. The shadow shifted slightly as if the figure was tilting its head. Now I understood why the window was covered. I forced my gaze back to the monitor. The figure was still there, but something was different. I squinted at the grainy image. Then I saw it. The figure's boots were facing forward, but I was still looking at the back of its head, at the long, dark coat. Either the figure's head was turned completely backward, or it had somehow rotated its entire body. It must have been 20 minutes before the figure moved away from the door. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. It was sickening to watch. When it finally disappeared from the screen, I exhaled in relief. My hands and legs trembled. Okay, think. The rules said to wait until it was gone. I just had to watch the front entrance camera. As soon as I saw it leave the store, I'd be safe. After a few minutes, I forced myself back to the monitor. I pressed the arrow key, switching through the feeds, searching for the front entrance. No. The figure's face filled the entire screen. Its eyes were wide and blank, a milky white, reflecting the faint light of the monitor. Its mouth was open in a silent scream, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. I screamed and stumbled back, slamming my eyes shut. The rules said not to make eye contact. Did that count through a screen? I covered my face, shaking uncontrollably. When I finally dared to peek through my fingers, I saw it. The figure was rapidly descending the wall, moving away from the ceiling-mounted camera like a spider. Then it pushed through the glass doors and vanished into the night. It was gone. I was safe, or as safe as I could be in that cursed store. I checked my watch. 4:58 a.m. Almost time. I really didn't want to leave the office, but I forced myself out, running as fast as I could through the store. I saw overturned displays, heard faint scratching from the storage room, and saw dark patches on the floor where the figure had stood. I also saw small, dark handprints smudged on the inside of the freezer doors, some smeared as if something had clawed at the glass from within. A minute later, I was back in the office, locking the door behind me. I sat there shaking until the end of my shift. At 5 a.m., I saw cars pulling into the parking lot. Weary-looking employees headed towards the entrance. As soon as the first one entered, I bolted from the store, ran to my car, and drove away as fast as I could. I'd never felt such relief, such pure, unadulterated joy. All my worries, even my financial ones, seemed insignificant compared to what I'd just experienced. As I turned onto the main road, I rolled down the windows and turned on the radio. Instead of the news station I usually listened to, a haunting melody filled the car. It was the same folk tune that had played in the store all night. And as I listened to the music, I knew my nights at Marrow's Mercantile were far from over. The drive home was a blur. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure in the long coat and hat standing by the side of the road watching me. Every shadow seemed to shift and writhe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like scraping claws. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I practically leaped out of the car and sprinted to my front door. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely insert them into the lock. Once inside, I bolted the door, checked all the windows, and then collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and terrified. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those milky white eyes, that unnervingly still figure, the dark stain on the floor. I kept hearing the scraping, the sobbing, the endless loop of the folk music. By the time the sun finally rose, I was a wreck. I called Silas, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. He listened in silence, then simply said, "Follow the instructions, Finn. That's all you need to do." He hung up. I knew I couldn't quit. I needed the money too desperately. So that night I returned to Marrow's Mercantile, and the second shift was even worse than the first. The scratching from the storage room was louder, more insistent. The dark stain on the stockroom floor had spread, almost reaching the dairy aisle. And the figure in the dairy aisle appeared more frequently, its movements becoming more erratic. It would glide from one end of the aisle to the other, then vanish, only to reappear moments later in a different spot. One time, it even seemed to phase through a shelf of canned goods. I spent most of the night locked in the back office, glued to the security monitor. I only left for the mandatory patrols, sprinting through the store as quickly as possible, avoiding the produce section and the stockroom at all costs. On one patrol, I noticed something new. Small, dark handprints smudged the glass of the freezer doors, much like the ones I had seen on my first night, only these were fresher. They were also inside the freezers, visible on the monitor showing the frozen food aisle, as if something had been trapped inside and tried to claw its way out. I shuddered and kept running. The music continued to cut out at random intervals, each silence sending a jolt of fear through me. And each time it resumed, the same looping melody played, driving me closer to the edge. As the nights passed, the events inside Marrow's Mercantile escalated. The sobbing from the produce section became more frequent, sometimes morphing into chilling whispers, barely audible beneath the music when it was playing. The scratching from the storage room grew louder, accompanied by heavy thumping sounds as if something large was throwing itself against the door. The figure in the dairy aisle began to move closer to the back office, sometimes appearing just outside the door on the security monitor, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. One night, during a patrol, I saw the figure standing directly in front of the root cellar door in the produce section. It was the first time I'd seen it up close. The wide-brimmed hat still obscured its face, but I could see the dark coat draped over a thin, almost skeletal frame. It held the milk bottle tightly in its hand, and milk was dripping down the front of the coat and pooling on the floor, mixing with the dark stain that had now seeped under the door from the stockroom. I froze, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure remained motionless, its back to me. Then it slowly turned its head. The hat remained still, but the head beneath it rotated a full 180 degrees, the back of its head now facing me. A low, guttural moan emanated from its throat. I screamed and ran. I made it back to the back office, slamming the door shut and locking it. I huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably, convinced that the figure would somehow find its way in. But it didn't. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I knew things were only going to get worse. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. On my final night, the music stopped completely. It didn't resume. The silence was deafening, broken only by the increasingly violent scratching and thumping from the storage room, which had reached a fever pitch. It sounded like whatever was down there was about to break through. The lights flickered erratically, threatening to go out completely. I stayed in the back office, watching the security monitors, my eyes darting from one screen to the next. The figure was everywhere. It was in the dairy aisle, the canned goods aisle, the cleaning supplies aisle. It was even on the roof, visible on one of the exterior cameras, pacing back and forth like a restless ghost. Then, it appeared on the monitor showing the back office door. It stood there, motionless, its head tilted at an unnatural angle as if listening, as I could feel its unseen gaze piercing through the screen, through the door, directly into my soul. I closed my eyes, praying for the shift to end. I knew that if I made it to 5 a.m., I would never return to Marrow's Mercantile. The clock ticked slowly, agonizingly slowly. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, a new sound joined the cacophony. A low, rhythmic chanting, coming from somewhere deep within the store. It was almost drowned out by the thumping, but it was there, growing steadily louder. Finally, the time arrived. 5 a.m. I didn't wait for the morning staff to arrive. I unlocked the back office door, ran through the store, and burst out into the pre-dawn darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I drove away, never looking back. I never contacted Silas again. I never collected my final paycheck. I just wanted to forget everything that had happened at Marrow's Mercantile. But I can't. The memories still haunt me. The scraping, the sobbing, the music, the figure, those white blank eyes, the chanting, the smell. They're all etched into my mind. And sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I think I can still hear the faint strains of that haunting folk tune, reminding me that some doors are best left unopened, some places are best left untouched, and some jobs are simply not worth the risk. I haven't heard the music anywhere else, not on the radio, not in any stores, nowhere. It's as if that melody is tied specifically to Marrow's Mercantile, a cursed tune echoing only in my memory. I've tried to rationalize what I experienced. I've told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, my overactive imagination running wild in the unsettling atmosphere of the store. But deep down, I know it was more than that. I felt a presence there, something malevolent and ancient, something that had been lurking in the shadows of Marrow's Mercantile long before I arrived. I've even done some research on the history of Oak Creek, the small town where the store is located. It turns out the area has a dark past, filled with local legends of strange rituals and unexplained disappearances. Some of the stories even mention a root cellar, used for storing more than just vegetables, sometimes used for other things. I haven't told many people about what happened. Those I have told have dismissed it as a nightmare or a tall tale. I understand their skepticism. It sounds unbelievable, even to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know I will never forget it. The other day, I was driving through a neighboring town and saw a sign for a small family-owned grocery store. It reminded me of Marrow's, and a shiver ran down my spine. I quickly drove past, averting my eyes. I've become hyper-vigilant, especially at night. I avoid dark places and quiet streets. I keep all the lights on in my apartment and sleep with a baseball bat under my bed. I know it sounds paranoid, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. But I can't. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear scratching coming from. And that's the end of the midnight shift at Marrow's. A chilling reminder that some places hold secrets best left undisturbed, and some jobs come with a far greater cost than anyone could imagine. The past can reach out and claim us in the most unexpected ways. If tonight's story left you checking the shadows and listening for faint melodies, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more haunting tales. Until next time, remember, some tunes are not meant to be heard, and some doors are not meant to be opened. This is the Midnight Narrator, signing off, but always watching from the shadows.